cartoon History of the Universe, Volume 1, The Evolution of Everything. Before time began, the entire universe was pressed together in one hot lump. Then came the Big Bang. In the first 30 minutes, all the original hydrogen and helium were formed. After several million years, the expanding gases calmed down enough to accumulate into clouds, which condensed, heating up again into clusters of stars. In the stellar furnaces, hydrogen and helium fused together, creating the middleweight elements like carbon, oxygen, and iron. As these first stars grew old, some exploded into supernovas. The heaviest elements, like gold and uranium, were formed in the intense heat and blown into space. 8 billion years after the Big Bang, the universe looked much the same as it does today. Great galaxies of stars, gas, and dust moving apart through empty space. It was then that our sun made the scene. The Big Bang is only the latest and most respectable theory of the origin of the universe. Years ago, before accurate methods of observation, all sorts of ideas prevailed.
The snake mated with the duck, see, and produced the cosmic egg. Tell it to the commoners.
Modern theories have more to explain, such as why the galaxies are receding. For instance, there's the little-known conspiracy theory. Very modern. The galaxies are fleeing because they hate us.
Better going out than coming in.
Nowadays, nearly everyone accepts that the universe started with a bang, but no one can figure out how it's going to end.
What's the computer say?
Wait and see.
At the edge of a spiral galaxy called the Milky Way, a cloud of gas began to collapse. Pulled together by the force of its own gravity, a compressed mass heated up, spinning faster and faster. The gas got so hot, its hydrogen atoms began to fuse, and the cloud became a giant hydrogen bomb, a star. As the fireball whirled, it flattened out and spun off a blazing halo into space. Most of the cast-off mass escaped forever, but some remained in orbit around the star. Over the next few million years, bits of this space junk stuck together until it had accumulated into 9 planets plus assorted moons, asteroids, and comets. The new star was the Sun, and its third planet was good old Earth. The Sun isn't the only star in the universe with planets. In the Milky Way alone, scientists estimate at least 1 billion stars have planets capable of supporting life. Some scientists even say that life out there must look like us. Guess what they say on Alpha Centauri?
They're just like us, I tell you. I hope so.
For some time now, Earthlings have been beaming signals to outer space, but so far no reply.
See? Just like human. Yeah, they don't return their call.
Soup or sandwich. The Earth cooled. Its surface scum hardened into continents. Steam condensed. Oceans fell from the sky. And if you believe most biology books, life emerged from nutrient-rich puddles of organic soup. There's only one thing wrong with the organic soup hypothesis. It's almost certainly false, and scientists know it. But in the absence of a better idea, they have held on to this one. Since it's in the nature of radioactive elements to decay into stable ones, the Earth must have been far more radioactive 4 billion years ago than it is today. This means geologists can date rocks by comparing relative amounts of, for instance, uranium and lead. There are less effective ways of dating rocks too.
Well then, how about a week from Saturday?
One surprising result of radio dating is that the earliest evidence of life, 3.5 billion years old, is almost as old as the very oldest rocks, 3.7 billion years. Apparently, early life forms weren't fazed by radiation.
You close your eyes for a few 100 million years, and the next thing you know, you're covered with green slime.
Until, in late 1988, German biochemist Gunther Schauser worked out an alternative. Life began not as a soup, but a sandwich, open-faced. According to this theory, proto-life was two-dimensional, a group of chemical reactions bound to a flat crystal surface in a boiling salty bath. The surface held the chemicals in place where they could come in contact with each other. No soupy drift. An exciting implication of the new theory is that life may still be originating today at undersea volcanic vents. First came self-promoting chemicals. Their very presence created a better environment for making more of themselves. One of these self-catalyzing reaction cycles created the early genetic equipment. Meanwhile, fatty byproducts formed membranes, within which proteins could evolve without drifting away. Until the little chemical factories, protected by their fatty skins, broke free of the surface and colonized the open sea.
Free, Caruso, we're free! The first crude cells.
One day, more than 3 billion years ago, some lucky cell discovered chlorophyll. When exposed to the sun, this green stuff enabled the cell to get energy from the simplest food, carbon dioxide and water. Now the larder had no limit. Despite the fact that they just sit there, these blue-green algae, the first plants, swept all before them. Except bacteria, of course.
Watch out for these green guys, Fred. They're passive-aggressive.
As the algae ate, they gave off the first pure oxygen. Oxygen-rusted metals turned ammonia and methane to nitrogen and carbon dioxide and formed an ozone layer in the upper atmosphere, which screened out cosmic rays.
Stop! We're destroying the environment!
Alarmist.
The plants paid for this pollution. New cells evolved which breathed oxygen and ate plants, the first animals.
Yum!
The first free oxygen came from plants, and today we still rely on plants to maintain the oxygen content of the air we breathe.
A rose does more for your nose than you might suppose.
And vice versa.
Despite 3 billion years of progress, most plants still live in the ocean. Even now, more than 3/4 of the world's fresh oxygen comes from one-celled marine plants called plankton. This is a good reason for saving the seas. For self-protection, both plant and animal cells clustered together in colonies. For efficiency, some cells began specializing in eating, digestion, seeing, coordination, or reproduction. Before long, the world had worms with brains.
Brains? What's a worm to think?
A digression on evolution. Since the time of the algae, organisms have competed for resources. But don't get the idea that evolution is a simple war of all against all, in which the weak perish and only the strong survive. No. From the very beginning of life, one of the most successful survival strategies has been cooperation. First of all, different strands of nucleic acid had to team up into chromosomes to store all the information needed to run a living cell. It is believed that modern cells, which are highly complex, evolved from cooperative arrangements among earlier, simpler cells.
How's it going at your end of the protoplasm?
I have been so worried about losing my individuality.
Hey, it's too late now, Jack.
Zip, zip.
Our own cells carry mysterious little globs called mitochondria, which have their own genetic material. I never know if I'm taking my mitochondria for a walk or vice versa. Then, single cells collaborated to make the higher life forms. And as for the higher life forms, well, haven't you heard of the bees and the flowers? On with the story. The origin of sex. For billions of years, all life reproduced asexually by simply dividing in half. Whoop, 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 whoop.
It's been nice being you.
All offspring were exactly like their parent, except for mutants. Now, suppose the environment changed. Say a new predator came along. Our asexuals, being all alike, were all equally liable to be killed. If a few of them had been tougher or faster, they might have escaped to propagate the species.
Asexual love tastes the same, too.
Clearly, individual differences are a good thing, and that's where sex comes in. Sex is a genetic way of creating and transmitting individual differences within a population. Also a way to sell comic books. Sex has been around a lot longer than sexual reproduction, ever since the first two strands of nucleic acid got close enough to form a chromosome and something different.
Ever take acid before?
Never, my darling.
In fact, sex originally was just the opposite of reproduction. Reproduction meant one cell splitting in two, but sex meant two cells joining for a while to play with each other's genes. Sex delayed reproduction.
I'm only doing this, Anita, because I want your descendants to be an improvement on you.
Egotiste.
Bacteria, tinier than the smallest cell, are themselves like a footnote to life. Yet scientists have recently discovered that bacteria too can have sex.
But not tonight, okay? I have a virus.
The experiment. Two strains of gonorrhea-causing bacterium, Gonococcus, one resistant to penicillin and the other not, were combined in a dish.
All right!
After a time, all the gonococci could resist penicillin. It turned out the bacteria had paired off, and the resistant ones had modified the genes of the others. A small but sophisticated act of sex.
My God! It's an orgy!
Sexual reproduction, the regular use of sex in the reproductive process, began as a perversion of ordinary reproduction. Who knows why?
I was under a lot of stress, see, and then...
Some cell, instead of dividing into two regular cells, split into four half cells called gametes.
Weirdo!
Since these gametes had only half a set of genes, they experienced the urge to merge. And that was it.
That was it?
Yes, by splitting into gametes and recombining, the cell had found a way to reproduce and shuffle its genes at the same time. With two parents, it worked even better, as the offspring combined features of both. Though sex was good for individual differences, and individual differences were good for survival. Therefore, sexual beings survived, and the ones who did best were the ones who liked sex the most, which is why sex felt good then, feels good now, and can only feel better tomorrow.
So you see here, eggs and sperm are just gametes, and oh, why don't I just show you?
Yes, my inarticulate brachiopod.
What was the effect of sex on evolution, Professor?
1. Sex is designed to create individual differences. This makes sexual species more adaptable and allowed us to take over the planet from the algae.
2. Sex allowed the development of the higher organism. Asexual creatures ensure survival by breeding like crazy. Sexual beings have more leisure to develop.
How about some sex, Rex?
Not tonight, honey. I'm going down to the Fern Bar with the fellas to, develop my elbows.
3. Sex speeded up evolution. Asexual creatures can pass good genes along only one line. Sex allows useful variations to be spread rapidly throughout a population.
You know, since that long-neck family showed up, no one will even look at me. Huh? Want a neck?
4. Sex created the need for natural death. When an asexual amoeba divides, its individual life becomes two new ones, unlike sexual beings, which have to be cleared away for the new generation.
Oh well. The Cambrian began after an ice age. Mountain building had raised the land, and glaciers had soaked up the seas, causing competition for food and space to increase. As a result, animals finally developed some armor. Thus, happy as a clam is one of the most ancient cliches. When the ice melted and shallow seas again flooded the lowlands, practically the whole aquarium had limy plates, or shells. crown of Cambrian creation was the Trilobite, whose plentiful fossils you can buy today in museum gift shops. These three-lobed bottom dwellers, with their great variety, flexible armor, good eyes, and willingness to eat any sort of bug, seemed adaptable enough to last forever. And yet, the Ordovician already produced a change which was to put trilobites out of the swim, and it wasn't this giant shell squid who was only passing through.
What's your problem?
A small, soft, wormy animal began to develop an internal stiffening rod called a notochord, running along its central nerve. The notochord evolved into a flexible sequence of cartilage units which protected the central nervous system without any cumbersome armor. The animal had no bones, no jaws, and no teeth, yet it was the first vertebrate, almost a fish.
Out of my way, Trilobite.
In the brief but wild Silurian, the jawless fish shared the seas with the Eurypterus, a 7-foot sea scorpion, so they had to grow armor after all, or else very fast fins. By evolving superior brains, backbones, ribs, skulls, scales, speed, and of course jaws, the fish survived and thrived. The Devonian is called the Age of Fishes. The first fish lacked jaws, and today 2 species of jawless fish survive, the parasitic hagfish and lampreys. Exactly how jaws evolved is not known. Early fish jaws are made up of several bony pieces, each apparently secreted along a nerve line. In mammals, the jaw has become one bone, but 2 tiny chips remain separate in a new role.
They're the hammer and anvil of our inner ear, key to efficient mammalian hearing.
Eh?
Competition in the sea was getting so intense that even life on land started to look good. As usual, plants led the way. During the Ordovician and Silurian, the algae began creeping onto the beach. Their decaying remains slowly built up a layer of good soil, and a new generation of land plants took root in the graves of their ancestors. By the Devonian, plants had covered the land, and the animals followed. First came the bugs, and then the fish.
I will be the first on land.
Because the bugs are already there.
Don't worry, they won't get the credit.
Why not?
Because my descendants will write the book.
Some daring fish began wriggling out of the water in search of food or glory.
We are the brave pioneers.
The ones that survived were the ones best able to wriggle back.
Phew! Hot enough to breathe out here without all those dead fish.
So nature selected in favor of a strong set of fins, which gradually evolved into legs. For breathing purposes, the land fish adapted its air bladder, originally used in the water for buoyancy, into lungs. The result of this bit of evolution was Ichthyostega, the first amphibian.
My fellow bugs, we must prepare for a long war.
While we usually think of a lungfish as the first animal out of the water, the true pioneers were the bugs. Insects, millipedes, scorpions, etc.
Well?
What accounts for the bug's spectacular success, over 900,000 living species, is among other things, a willingness to eat anything, including other bugs.
Jack, flies, don't you know what they eat?
Some have developed regimented social systems.
It is good that we do all the work and the queen gets all the sex.
Yes, good for the hive.
While others are just plain indestructible.
Cackroot!
It's laughing.
The Carboniferous is named for coal, the eventual byproduct of the forest where Ichthyostega's children lived their semi-fishy lives. Especially fishy were their sex lives. Consider. When a male amphibian spotted a likely female, he went into a song and dance. She signaled acceptance by laying a huge number of soft, shellless eggs in the water. And left the rest to him. They never even touched.
Later, fish face.
The male fertilized the eggs in private. They hatched, and another generation of amphibians began its miserable existence. Their sexual habits were keeping the amphibians in the water, but how to lay eggs on dry land? A protective shell would be needed, but then, how could the eggs be fertilized?
Hopeless. I'm going back to being a fish.
Some amphibians laid semi-soft eggs, which had to be fertilized before the shell congealed.
No! No!
Yeah, wait,
One thing led to another.
maybe if I climb up here.
Oh, Herbert.
And soon, they learned to fertilize the eggs before they were laid, a method which hasn't been improved in 300 million years. Their hard-shelled eggs could be laid anywhere, and these amphibians were now romantic reptiles. In the evolution of sex, no animals have acquired more bizarre habits than the insects. Almost all bees, for example, are female, and at season's end, they drive the males from the hive.
If you ask me, the queen has them totally brainwashed.
In many species, the male courts the female with a gift of something tasty, like a dead fly or a ball of dung.
For our bridal chamber.
Praying mantises may have carried this ritual a mite too far, as the female eats the male himself after the act.
Oh, Herbert, this has been a once-in-a-lifetime experience.
And speaking of mites, termites form stable marriages that can last for years.
But everyone knows a termite's life is boring, right, honey?
Yeah.
Another problem faced by reptiles was regulating body heat. This is harder on land where temperatures fluctuate more than in the water. During the Permian, many reptiles became expert sunbathers, catching the rays with specially designed solar collectors, then retreating to shade when they'd had enough. This worked fine as long as the sun was out and the weather was warm.
But when it rained, blah!
Or the wind wasn't blowing too hard.
A few more windy days and finbacks are finished.
Or flying!
Meanwhile, in cool Permian South Africa, other reptiles, the therapsids, were learning to generate heat internally by burning their food faster. This meant therapsids had to eat more than ordinary reptiles.
Junior, don't whoop your lizard. You'll make yourself feverish. That's the idea, Ma.
That's good.
To gather their food more actively, therapsids gave up the slithering gait of the lizards in favor of a more upright stance. For more efficient processing, their teeth diversified into cutters and grinders. Hair probably started as therapsid side whiskers, used to extend the sense of touch, and then spread over the body later as a way to keep warm. Because of their structure, teeth, and probable hair, the therapsids are also known as mammal-like reptiles.
Too ugly to survive.
The rise of the mammal-like reptiles marked a great episode of extinction, the first of 3 in Earth history.
Don't everybody take off at once.
In the sea, the last trilobites died out, while on land, many primitive amphibians croaked.
A lethal pun.
The second episode of mass death came 160 million years later with the extinction of the dinosaurs, about which more later. And the third is now, as we humans wipe out the wildlife. So hope we can preserve ourselves.
At least we bug folk will pull through.
In the early Triassic, the therapsids faced their first real competition. Speedy little bipeds called thecodonts.
Come back with my dinner!
Descended from aquatic reptiles whose long hind legs were adapted for swimming, thecodonts found long legs to be handy on land too.
Our family will make giant strides.
Only twice in Earth history has a quadruped stood up on two legs, and both times the experiment was a fantastic success. For the animal that tried it anyway, ecodont children began to grow larger.
Out of the dining area, hairy one.
Good use of the feet, son.
And larger.
Therapsid? What therapsid?
Unable to compete with such monsters, the larger therapsids died out. Only a very few small types survived to evolve into the first mammals. For 130 million years, the tiny mammals were kept down by the thecodont's giant descendant, otherwise known as the dinosaur.
Everyone's still tiny down there? Good.
When giant reptile bones were first unearthed in the late 1700s, they presented a challenge to religion. The Bible says nothing about extinct species.
God is perfect. Therefore, he wouldn't create anything he didn't intend to use. Therefore, this doesn't exist. Impeccable logic.
In an effort to be helpful, scientists proposed the theory of many creations. Extinct species had been wiped out in a series of catastrophes, each followed by a fresh creation.
And it requires only a minor rewrite of a few pages in Genesis. It can be arranged, I guess.
Thus, when the theory of evolution was finally announced in 1859, dinosaurs were used as an argument against it.
It's simple, really. When Noah sailed, the dinosaurs missed the boat.
In the Jurassic, small dinosaurs evolved into birds, while the large meat-eaters got even meatier. Dinosaur cousins invaded the air and the sea. The big plant eaters got so fat they had to return to all fours. Because brontosaurs often walked in mud, they left behind fossil footprints, which have given us glimpses of actual episodes of brontosaurian life. Here are three. Brontosaurus fleeing Allosaurus. At a weight upward of 30 tons, Bronte's top speed was only 12 miles per hour. A migrating herd of 23 brontosaurs.
Ow! My tail! Ow! Ouch!
The third set of tracks shows only a brontosaur's forefeet, with an occasional hind foot impression. Was the beast idly swimming, as most authorities say, or was it doing something else? And afterwards, the brontosaurs invented necking.
Did you feel the earth move?
Oh, honey buns, that was the continental drift.
In the early dinosaur era, all the continents were lumped together on one side of the Earth.
Around 200 million years ago, South America split off from Africa and began to drift away. Today, the continental drift continues as heat, rising from inside the Earth, makes the solid rock flow. North America is riding a westward flow. In California, it runs into a contrary flow. The result? Earthquakes.
You know, it's just a good thing we know how to go with the flow out here.
But which flow?
The Crowded Cretaceous was the height of the dinosaur era. In this scene, the giant Tyrannosaurus rex eyes some duckbills while his cousin Brontosaurus flees from a rampaging herd of Triceratops. The vegetation begins to look modern as broadleaf trees and grass appear for the first time. Some plants are developing flowers to lure the newly evolved bees who will be used to carry pollen to other flowers for purposes of plant sex. A few large birds have also appeared. Suddenly, around 70 million years ago, for reasons that are still unclear, the world cooled rapidly. In the ocean, entire populations of one-celled plankton perished, setting off an ecological catastrophe.
Hey, what are we supposed to eat?
With the basis of the food chain gone, many families of sea life were wiped out, including various fish, shellfish, and all the giant sea reptiles. On land, the devastation was equally widespread. As plants died out, all the animals began to suffer, especially the giants. The undernourished dinosaurs, like poisoned birds, laid eggs with thinner and thinner shells. The embryos, unable to draw enough calcium from their eggshells to develop bones, were too weak to hatch. After 130 million years of dominance, the dinosaurs had finally left the world to their old competitors, the tiny mammals. The disappearance of the dinosaurs has given rise to many theories, some of which do not take all the facts into account.
Clearly, they were allergic to newly evolved plants and sneezed themselves to death.
Clearly, my dear colleague, tiny mammals eat their eggs.
Maybe they rotted their tiny brains with dinosaur comics. The latest and most persuasive idea proposes an errant asteroid plowing into the Earth and kicking up enough dust to cool the climate drastically for several years. It could happen again.
It's raining pterodactyls!
But as the debate goes on, dinosaur fans, remember, only the big ones died out. The small dinosaurs which sprouted wings are still with us, as birds.
They built rockets and blasted off.
They went out for cigarettes and never came back.
Ah! A dinosaur! The Age of Mammals. The tiny mammals scurried out of the shadows, racing to take the places vacated by the dinosaurs. Some went for the plains, dodging the 8-foot terracrane, Diatrema. Others chased insects into the air. Still others developed a taste for fish and tried to swim.
Would you please drown and stop scaring the fish?
While our ancestors, the primates, just stayed in the trees where they had always been.
Oh, gosh!
By the Eocene epoch, mammals were no longer tiny. Here we see Uintatherium, 7 feet tall at the shoulder. Zeuglodon, an ancestral whale. Some early bats. Trichodon, a primitive hoofed mammal. And little Eohippus, the dawn horse. Exactly how wings evolved is something of a mystery. The problem is that partly evolved wings are useless for flying. Since trying to fly would be fatal, it's hard to see how a half-winged animal could live to reproduce. And yet...
This is batty!
The answer seems to be that half a wing has some other function, like snagging bugs, and only later is used for flight.
Wow! Look how Bernadette is using her bug snaggers!
So many delicious species were now evolving that mammals began eating each other. The earliest mammal meat-eaters, the crude creodonts, were pushed aside by more intelligent types who quickly became the royalty of nature.
We're the reigning cats and dogs! Yowl! I kill for puns like that!
The prey that got away were the fast ones. Early horses, pigs, antelopes, and little running rhinos. The ones that didn't need to get away were the mean ones. Big rhinos and their cousins. The Oligocene is called the Age of Horns. Still, the largest land mammal of all time was a hornless Oligocene rhino, the Leucotherium, 18 feet tall at the shoulder. Most animals with horns maintain their equipment through sexual competition. Here's how it works. The animal is the Oligocene horned gopher. Epiphyllus. The horned males bash and grapple until one of them retires from the field, exhausted. Winner takes all females, so horns tend to get bigger and bigger to the point of absurdity.
Extinction looms, brother.
Many modern whales and dolphins appeared in the seas of the Miocene epoch. Bigger than Belucotherium, bigger than any dinosaur, whales are the biggest animals in Earth history, and the brainiest. On land, the Miocene produced the mastodons. This shovel tusker is called Ambulodon, and behind it is mammoth.
Quit blocking progress!
Outside the mammalian mainstream, in isolated spots like Australia, the primitive types known as Marsupials and Monotremes evolved. The main monotreme is the duck-billed platypus, which lays eggs.
I think of myself as a babble-bodied duck.
My main monitoring!
Marsupials, kangaroos, wombats, etc. give birth to a half-formed embryo, which they carry around in a special pouch until it's ready to go.
Oh, are you ready yet?
Ghost, Mummy, I don't know.
While most marsupials are now endangered species, one, the possum, still thrives unchanged after 40 million years. Its survival secret is cowardice.
It's only plain possum. We could eat it.
Yeah, but who can stomach such a wimp?
Meanwhile, back in the trees, the primates still lived as they had since the days of the dinosaurs. Primitive primates resemble squirrels, but for some reason squirrels didn't evolve into humans.
Except in a few cases.
One reason may be that primates have toenails instead of claws, so they are forced to grasp the branch. Another is that primates eat bugs. So, like many hunters, they develop stereo vision, with both eyes facing front. The earliest apes had fairly short arms and long legs like other animals. But apes discovered a new way to get around the treetops, brachiation, or swinging. This naturally led to longer arms, shorter thumbs, and shorter legs.
You are such a swinger, you big ape.
And my kids will ape me.
By the Miocene, several apes had evolved. Propleopithecus, the most expert swinger, ancestor of the gibbon. Dryopithecus, a more versatile type. And the obscure Ramapithecus, which apparently spent some time on the ground. And so we come to the placid Pliocene, climax of the Age of Mammals. During the Pliocene, the Miocene jungles receded, giving way to vast plains covered with herds of antelopes, three-toed horses, camels, giraffes, rhinos, and mastodons. Pliocene carnivores included saber-toothed cats, dogs, dog bears, and hyenas. As the savanna encroached on their forest home, some of the primates were finally forced out of the trees. A group of Pliocene monkeys took to the plains and evolved into baboons. Of the apes, only a few bands wandered onto the steppe, at first making short forays for food, but gradually staying longer and longer. By the end of the epoch, this primate walked upright on two legs and was adapted, more or less, to life on the ground. The age of human beings had begun. Next, the descent and ascent of genus Homo.